came on board last minute with us. So he will be doing the presentation along with Dustin here, who's going to be Skyping in. You will see his image shortly, and they will both explain to us how a digital ledger is made. Like I said, it's a very interesting presentation. I'm very interested myself. Looking forward to this. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask Dustin. He can see you, he can hear you, and he's calling all the way from Panama, right? Okay. So there's Dustin, and we'll get this presentation started.
So my name is Daniel Matalon, and I'm actually here to assist Dustin with his presentation. As you can see, he's piped in from Panama there. So I'm not on the list of speakers, so if anybody has some interest in my background, I'll just briefly say that I've been speaking about technology and business models for about 25 years, along with other things that I've been doing. And I asked Dustin, as he was preparing this presentation for you guys, whether, because I happen to be coming to New York at the same time and he couldn't be here, whether him and I would be able to do this together, because I think part of what the challenge that we have in understanding this technology is to understand the purpose of it. I think that every explanation we make about how a technology works is really only necessary for us in terms of how it relates to our life. And as Dustin and I are working on some pretty significant projects in the cryptocurrency space, of which blockchain comes from, right? We all know we would not be here unless somebody had thought up a new form of cash, right? We have a blockchain technology that comes off of that, right? So as part of the projects that we're working on, can I just say a little bit about our Slick project for a moment, just for reference, Dustin?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. So we're putting together a pretty mammoth mining operation all over the world. How many in this room have heard the term mining in reference to cryptocurrency? Is anybody not? Okay. How many of you are have looked enough at the concept of mining to know that it's really not mining? Okay? We're solving math puzzles. And one of the interesting things about really digging into what mining is all about is one of the questions that typically come up about the whole mining exercise is that there is eventually, at least within Bitcoin and certainly in other cryptocurrencies, a finite amount of currency that's ever going to get mined. And what happens then? And as Dustin and his engineers at Slick explained to me, he said, there's nothing that happens within the blockchain without a mining operation being in place. Right? Every time a transaction takes place, and just to kind of build on what I saw Saul explaining here, a mining outfit, a mining element has to be involved in validating that transaction, which means it's part of the foundation of everything that takes place throughout the entire blockchain. And so as we were, and initially my company came on board his Slick project to help advise it, invest in it, and that sort of thing, what we began to see is that part of what was going to be necessary was to create some education around what blockchain and cryptocurrency are all about, because none of it, I think, was there a question in the back of the room where somebody said, is it okay if somebody just starts up their own blockchain, essentially, right? That was one of our last questions. And your answer was really strong, because basically you said, well, anybody can do that, but unless there's adoption and buy-in by a larger group than the person who started it, it's not really going to go anywhere, just like a social network of one single person, right? Which is, I think, the analogy you made. So I think, Dustin, you want to just throw up what I know you have prepared in terms of your first slide, because everything that Saul just went through very effectively in giving us the broad scope of how this technology works really came down to an issue of why does this technology even need to exist in the first place? You're going to be talking about music models, film models, television business models. We have models for all of that now. Why do we need a blockchain? We're a small enough group. Let me ask that question out there. Why do we even need that? You have some experience in it, sounds like.
Trust.
Trust. Why is that an issue?
Decentralized networks are inherently trusted.
Okay. Decentralized networks. Now, I'm not a technician. I do my best to try to understand it in non-technical terms because I'm a student of human behavior. And I've been really struggling with the term decentralization. Has anybody else had any issue with understanding what that is about? Thank you for your honesty. So I find it really hard to understand that concept because decentralization sounds a little chaotic. Who's in charge? And that's really the answer, right? I think if for anybody else who didn't hear that, the answer is that we're all in charge, right? Dustin, in terms of what you have prepared to show to the audience here, to go from starting from what Saul introduced tonight to where we're going, you're about to see a practical application of an actual blockchain as it relates to the music industry, right? And as we do that, we want to talk and add into what Saul was just discussing here about how the ownership of trust amongst the entire network solves a very key set of problems, not only within the music industry, but also in my experience within the television side. You and I haven't practiced doing this, so you guys will all be compassionate with us as we practice in front of you. But let's start with some of the issues that you prepared before we get into your demonstration so we can make sure everybody is on board with where we're going.
Sure. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Dustin. I'm an IBM Blockchain Foundation developer, and I'm also a Microsoft certified educator. I'm from the Cayman Islands, and like Daniel said, we have several projects going on. One of those is called Cayman Coin, and it has to do with blockchain creation and how we can apply blockchain to different facets of everyday life. And another one is called Reggae Coin, and that particularly is particularly to do with the music industry. But in this demonstration, I have a very short PowerPoint, and then I'm going to go into some of the technical side of blockchain, and I'll give you a live demonstration of deploying a smart contract to the blockchain with the information that's needed in there. So I'll start with this this PowerPoint slide, and some of you may find this familiar. Some of you may know Kayla. Kayla created a song called Carnival Days, produced by Tony Dauphin, who of course is part of the, is a professor in musical entrepreneurship over at LIU. So we're gonna use this as a use case. We're gonna make this a use case of how we can write this information to the blockchain through a smart contract. And this is part of this whole digital ledger thing because here we have Spotify, and Kayla is she's sharing her music through this streaming service called Spotify, which we're all familiar with.
And just for me to insert here in terms of the themes that we're talking about, we have something out in the world, Dustin, that works fine called Spotify that you've got a picture of on right now. So why do we need a new one?
Well, the endpoint of it is fine. However, when an artist does all of this work and they've created this genuine content and they put it out to the world to stream, and someone can purchase the song and download it, how long does it take to get paid for this work? I mean, we all have to eat. But what about the intellectual property rights? And some of that is already taken care of. But by putting this onto the blockchain through the use of a smart contract, we're eliminating the middleman that's always been involved in the music industry, whether it's EMI or the record companies that need to tally up how many records were sold and so on and so forth. So this is why it's important. Yes, we have this software and we have this service that's available already, but you know, at the end of the day, there's so many middlemen involved in it that the artist is getting pennies for the dollar, where the middleman is getting 50 cents. Now, is that fair? I mean, part of the whole thing about blockchain is trust and consensus, and what that boils down to is also fairness.
And, you know, since everybody involved in this program here is part of media and entrepreneurship, this issue of trust is not just on the music side, it's also on the advertising side. I have pretty good acquaintance with Media Trust, and almost all of their work for the last 15 years has been rooting out clickbait and fake clicks and advertising, all of that goes on to drive up the cost of advertising and marketing beyond what it's really about, right? And you still have that same problem within music, and you have that in other forms of media distribution. So in the case of Spotify, while we're now in a streaming world versus a radio distribution world, we still have that issue of trust to solve.
Right. So here we have, this is the second slide. So we have the author, the creator, the genuine content, and then their content, whether it's text or music. In this case, we're going to speak to music. And so we can write a smart contract around that. And that smart contract is exactly what it is. It's a piece of software that activates once certain conditions have been met. And the smart contract is stored on the blockchain. And if we can get like a streaming service such as Spotify to speak to the blockchain that activates the smart contracts, then once the consumer purchases that genuine content, it's recorded on the blockchain, thus activating smart contracts. And at the end of the day, the author is the author of said content is reciprocated for all their hard work without having to go through this record company that wants to take 50% for distribution or what have you. But this seems to be one of the major issues within the music industry as it is. So that's why, so for this particular demonstration, I created a private blockchain with a custom smart contract, and I'm going to show you how that works and how we can recall the information and so on.
And as you get that prepped up, I'm going to ask you this question for everybody in the room also, Dustin, because you know how this technology works, and there may be people in this room that may never have to write any code like you do, but you may be in charge of other people that are going to write that code for you, right? If somebody knows how to do what you know how to do, this demonstration you're about to go through, how long would it have taken you once you have the knowledge of how to do it?
I'm sorry, to write the smart contract?
This demonstration of this private blockchain that you've set up for this demonstration, let's say.
This took the better part of a week to put together and make sure it works. So it's technically heavy, but if you're interested in it, it's something that is definitely you can accomplish. It just takes a bit of dedication and work, like writing in a piece of software, but it's based on existing blockchains already. So this particular one is actually based on the Ethereum blockchain. How many people have, I'm sure everybody's heard of Ethereum, correct?
Okay.
Right, so this is a private blockchain that's based on the Ethereum protocol, and it's just running on my server here. And you can also, just to make it in a smaller sense, we can deploy it to a testnet, which would be, a testnet is a worldwide testing side of the Ethereum blockchain that you can use. But for this instance, we're just going to use the one on my server here. Okay, So one of the most important things about digital ledgers and smart contracts and the data that goes in there, all this data is written to blocks, and it's written in the form of hashes, and hashes are like fingerprints. That's the identification. They're unique, and that's what builds the trust of the blockchain, because that hash is written to the block, and then the block is in the chain, and each block on the chain is tied to the one in front of it as well as the one behind it. In doing so, it makes it immutable. In theory, it's possible to corrupt the blockchain, but you would need something like a quantum computer and a lot of time. But it's practically impossible at this point. And and one of the reasons for that is the hashes, and these hashes again, they're the fingerprints to this to the data that's written to the block. And I'll show you how we can use a hash to discover blocks and explore the blocks and so on. So I'm just going to stop the presentation on that, and then I'm going to bring up the actual digital ledger and that side of things. Daniel, did you have anything to say before I bring this? I bring up the server?
I mean, you're asking me to fill space for you while you bring that up?
I'm ready to go.
I do want to say this. I think that everybody in this room is here because they're interested in the future and they're interested in an opportunity. And if you think about, and somebody made the reference, I think it was you, Saul, about where we were with the internet in the 90s. Imagine if you could, in 1994, and you had an opportunity to explain to somebody what you now know about the internet. How incredibly difficult that would be. Imagine the people who were considered the experts in 1998, and there were literally people who came into the internet in 2001 who had never even heard of it before then, who far outpaced the people in 1998 who were considered the experts of that period. It's clearly where we are. So if you, and I think it would be hard not to, and for any of us to feel overwhelmed by this technology, just place yourself in that opportunity. If you understand 3% more tomorrow than you did today, you're going to be well ahead of the game, but your brain's probably going to hurt. Right? And part of what we do by having these conversations going back and forth, just like a human blockchain, we're beginning to figure out how all these pieces fit by making real world applications of what it is that we're looking at. So this is really what we're talking about here with respect to the demonstration you put together.
Okay, so let me just bring this up. So here we go. So this is the user interface that I created around being able to input into the smart contract that I created. It's very simple, very straightforward, but I'm not going to use this side of it. I want you guys to see some of the technical stuff that's going on. So we're going to start with this nice clean interface, and then we're going to get a little more codey, and then we'll eventually end up in the matrix. Can
I just add in, because I know you and I talked about this beforehand, and pardon me if I'm interrupting you, but I just want to get this piece out. When we look at the artist and the composer and the producer and the music track, we're talking about two things. We're talking about a transaction, and we're also talking about relationships. Because that's really what the technology is about marrying the relationships and the transactions together in a way that is credible, and in a way that is trackable, and therefore is a way that's trustable. Okay? Go ahead.
Right. And for this one, I'm actually going to use, I was speaking to Tony just briefly, and he actually gave me the international standard recording code, and this is something that goes into every track that's released to the public. It's a way of tracking this particular song. So there are tracking methods in place, but they're written to databases that are proprietary to each of the entities that are tracking it. And then these databases aren't talking to each other. But what if we could put it on the blockchain so that the databases could talk to each other? certainly change the game as it is now. So we're actually going to use a real song and the international standard recording code and so on. So I'm just going to flip over to the code side of things. So here is the code for the smart contract that I wrote for this particular demonstration. And in it, it's got several, as you can see, several fields to fill in. And once we deploy the contract onto the smart contract onto the blockchain, we'll be able to invoke the contract, interact with it, and deploy and have it have that information stored on the blockchain after interacting with it. And the interaction part is filling in who the artist is, who the composer is, who the producer is, and so on. So we're gonna get started with that. So the first thing we're going to do is, now that the smart contract is already made, and the digital ledger is running in the background, which we can actually explore through a block explorer. And I'll give you just a quick preview of what the blockchain looks like on the back end. And this is the blockchain here running on the back end. You can see the chains here, and you can see the mining tool there. And this is the blockchain that's running in the background. And what I'm doing from this server is I'm mining blocks on this private blockchain that I've created. This is important because when we deploy this contract, a miner has to solve the algorithm or the hash in order to write the block. And that's what happens during this digital ledger, this whole process of the digital ledger, because it's a living, breathing thing almost. So here we are, we're gonna deploy the contract. It's asking me for a passphrase or a password that's associated with this particular address here. What this address is the wallet of, in this case, the LIU Brooklyn, so that it can write a transaction to the blockchain, and it has to come from a wallet. A wallet has to participate in this process because this is part of the Ethereum blockchain. It's called gas. Just like gas for a car, you have to pay gas to interact with the blockchain as it's going. So the blockchain has just been interacted with. We paid gas. Now we have a deployed contract over here. You can see it over here. The deployed contract is the LIU Brooklyn contract. It is written to block 4764 that you can see over here. We can actually go back to the Ethereum block explorer. We can refresh, and we can see that there it is, 4764. This is the contract that we just deployed onto the blockchain. Now that contract doesn't have any valuable information in it yet. We have to invoke the contract to talk to it. And if we want to go to the sort of the matrix side of things, that's what this is, green and black and the gobbledygook, as some people might refer to it. But as you're a techie, this is sort of the way you look at it. You see, it's almost as if you can read this better than you're reading the standard UI. User interface. So
and here, let me just kind of insert this to kind of touch on what Saul was talking about in his story of how we ended up here. We have systems that could simply input a track and a title and a this and a that. I mean, that's kind of what Spotify is, right? But in that system, somebody can get in and make a change in a central server that completely eradicates the information from before, and nobody really has any way of knowing. There's no checks and balances in that system. Right? When we're sitting and looking under the hood here, within what would eventually be a blockchain community, if it got large enough to be that and wasn't just one guy starting his blockchain that nobody else was involved in, but if it became a Spotify competitor, let's say, it would not be possible in practical terms to be able to make that change within every block. Because basically, as somebody once explained to me, a blockchain is simply a chain of databases.
Oh, no, yes.
right?
Yeah, like a chain of blocks, and databases can actually attach to that chain. So, and that this is what can create a trust, because it's about intellectual property rights, about the reciprocation of those rights, and so on. So here we're back on to the what's called the remix, and this is something from Ethereum, which allows us to interact with smart contracts. And I'm using it specifically for this contract that we're deployed, so that you guys can see what's happening behind the scenes, because there'll come a day when you want to enter the data into a smart contract, you're going to do it from an interface that looks like this, and all of this stuff is going to happen in the background, and no one's going to see what's going on, and the writing to the digital ledger and everything else. So here we have the deploy contract. We just deployed it, and I'm going to expand it a little bit, and now I'm going to enter some data. So we're going to use Kayla, for example. So I'm going to enter Kayla as the artist. Composer was Tony Dauphin. The producer was also Tony. The name of the track was Carnival Day. The label was Blackbird's Music Group. And this final string that I'm about to enter here is the international standard recording code. And Tony actually gave me the official one, so I'm just going to go ahead and enter that, which is QZ. That's the country. The next three letters represent the company that this particular track is under. Then you have a set of numericals, so 17 would be the next in this string of numbers here, which represents the year that this track was created, and then an assigned number from the company itself, which is 000, actually there's one more, 01, so that is the official code. So now we've invoked the contract, it's sitting on the blockchain, and we're gonna interact with it. And everything that's done on the blockchain is known as a transaction. And we're so used to dealing with transactions as they have to do with currency. But anything that's done on the blockchain is referred to as a transaction. So we're going to transact with it.
And that would also include like an audience member voting on a track, something like that, right? That would be a transaction.
Exactly. So now, what we've just done, the functions that I've just done by hitting this transaction piece was to set the owner of this particular track through the smart contract, and it was done. We can see we have block 4795, and I'll go over to the Ethereum block explorer, and here we have block 4795, and that was a transaction that we've just written to the blockchain, and within that transaction we're going to see that the smart contract has written, I think you guys, can everybody see this part? I'm just going to make it a little bigger. Here is block 4795, that's it, and the transaction. The status, not available at the moment. Here's the transaction hash. This was the amount of gas that was used to write the smart contract, and the decoded input into the smart contract is the artist is Caleb, composer's Tony, producer's Tony, the track was Carnival Day, the label was Blackbeard's Music Group, and the track number. So now, this is written on the blockchain. This can never be changed. So this is, this is provenance. This is a way to ensure the intellectual property rights that an artist has his rights to. But going beyond that, if we were dealing with Spotify, if we had a platform that once that song is purchased, okay, so someone goes to Spotify, they find a song by Kayla called Carnival Day, and they purchase it, they download it, not just streaming, but purchasing and downloading. What if that you as the artist or label or composer, producer could get paid right away without having to wait months for the record company to tally up all the sales and so on. By having a smart contract, the minute that somebody has paid for that, it can activate a condition within the smart contract that all of these people that were involved in the creation of this song will get paid in, say, in this case, Ethereum, because we're using the Ethereum blockchain, to which they can convert to either, US cash or whatever.
And let me add another business model element here too, because all of these entrepreneurs here are going to be having ideas that they're going to raise capital on. We talked about what's happening in crowdfunding. You go out and raise capital, let's just put a number on it, let's say $50 million for this project over here, and investors are going to start getting a return once the company starts making profits. Well, that can be written into the Ethereum contract too, so the disbursements of those profits can be happening instantly. Like literally on a daily basis if the company produces revenues like that, right? So what that does is extend that trust factor one step further to the other relationships that are involved in getting that project off the ground, which are the investors and the financiers.
Exactly. So this is in essence the digital ledger. This is using a smart contract to deploying a smart contract to the digital ledger and then interacting with it and finally setting that smart contract in there. So now we can always go back. If we look at our block explorer, we're already on block 4,821. But the block for this particular contract is 4795. So if I go here and I put in 4795, there it is. We've got the time stamp. We've got the data that was written, the hash that was written, and this is the fingerprint. Remember, that's what that means. The hash is the fingerprint. And here's the data, which is actually encoded in all these zeros and so on, but that translates to the information that you're going to find here, which is the artist name, producer, composer, and so on. So the trust factor is out the door with blockchain and smart contracts and this sort of thing. And just once again, this is the digital ledger behind the scenes as it's going, and you can see the block has reached the chain, the block is mined, and that's what happens behind the scenes. This is mining. This is my server mining this private blockchain or this private distributed ledger that I've just created. That's it going there through mining. But it's interesting and it's something that I wanted to point out to someone, to everyone in fact. The blockchain, the essence of the blockchain and the distributed ledger has been around for thousands of years, because you think back to the Sumerian civilization when they were writing, they were keeping records on clay tablets, and they would make the dual copies of the clay tablets, and then they put them in the sun to dry. So this person had a copy, and this person had a copy, but they were the same. So that's your distributed ledger right there that's been around for a very long time, but now we've come to the point where, I know it's kind of out here, but it's the truth. But so now we've come to the point where we're using the internet and networking to provide the basis for the distributed ledger.
And if you compare that kind of demonstration that he just made to somebody writing HTML in 1997, you had to know that kind of stuff in the back end back then to be able to write a web page, right? Now you just pull up WordPress and you have it gone, it's up there in 5 minutes, right? And we're going to evolve to that. Because what's going to happen as more and more of you idea people, not just technicians, who come in and build solutions and marry that to technology, each time that gets done, the next sequence is going to be that much easier. That's a blockchain within and of itself on a philosophical level, right?
Right. So, and to speak to that, Daniel, this is what, so we were using a more codified sort of entry process, but in the end, this is what's gonna.
That's all it's gonna be seen on the front end, is what you're
We're
saying.
used to enter that data. So that's exactly moving from having to write HTML to just bringing up WordPress and putting it out there. So instead of having to write the whole smart contract, you're just going to be inputting fields of smart contracts that are already going to be written for you and so on. So that is the evolutionary steps of where the digital ledger will end up being. Now, even to speak to that, let's look at this. This is like the matrix stuff, right? But if we were to, I'll show you the old way of kind of writing to, so I'll attach to, right now what I just did was I attached to the blockchain. And in that, I'm going to send, I'll just bring up the command here. I'm going to send money or Ethereum from one user to another in a very technical way, or the writing of the HTML way before. Now everybody can just get a digital wallet and you use it as an app on your phone, but I'll show you how it was done in the old days. And when I say the old days, I mean like last year, because the technology advances so fast every year. So first I'm going to unlock the account. That's what that is. It's going to ask me for the passphrase. I put the passphrase in there. It's going to tell me, good, it's true. So now I'm going to transfer funds between two wallet accounts that are on this private blockchain. And I want you to keep your eyes over here on the left-hand side of the screen where I'm highlighting. I want you to keep your eyes there as I send this transaction through. So, boom, there's the transaction. I submitted it over here and the transaction was there. And what it's saying is that I submitted a transaction and I sent 0.3 Ether from this person here. Oh, it's moving so fast. From this person here to this recipient here. And now I can go back to a more user-friendly way of looking at that transaction. And here we find a transaction. There it is. There is a transaction that I just did in this sort of matrix style way of doing it. But this is how fast this technology is evolving as well. So I just wanted to point that out as we were speaking to it.
Any comments are just as valuable as questions? Anybody?
I have one, probably not gonna like it. Both of you guys were talking about trusting the blockchain. Okay? You cannot trust the blockchain. That's the whole point. And the only reason I'm saying is because it's fundamental to blockchains. We've been talking about Ethereum and then Bitcoin, which is Satoshi. You cannot trust them. The example was given where people lost, and it's happened on both of the chains, and it's resulted in big, discussions about what really should be done, because the fact is that if you lose that money, somebody takes your magic word, and they're able to steal your money, you have no recourse whatsoever. In the bank, somebody steals your money, you can say, hey, somebody stole my credit card, you have a chance of getting it back. On the blockchain, you cannot. So whatever that blockchain says, that's the fact. And that's why it's trustless, but that's also the power. That's why this all works, that's why it's all taking off. Because everybody has the same record, and that record is the fact. It's not that you don't like it, or I don't like it, too bad. That's the fact.
So I think what I hear you saying is you can't trust it, but you can trust it.
No, you cannot trust the blockchain. It is trustless.
Okay.
It's whatever it says, that's what is the fact. Now, you can't. You can't trust it when that the money you have today is going to be there tomorrow, or you have any recourse to get it back. Now, there's a lot of stuff in place to make sure that that doesn't happen, and it's been very, blockchain's taken off. I make a living off blockchain. I love blockchain. I'm not down crazy, but I think it's very important because you'll hear other people talk tomorrow about blockchains you can't trust. Okay, they've taken the basic, they said, oh, this trustless stuff doesn't necessarily work. People have lost a lot of money because of these trustless stuff. So let's do it a little bit different. So I think that's important to understand. Okay? And this is an academic environment.
No, we should talk about it.
And so I think we should make sure that we understand the basics of them. You know, so when we talk about other alternatives, and Dustin was talking about some of those, alluding to those, and there was a question about ODA earlier. Those are other techniques where they do actually try to apply some measure of trust to those blockchains. I told you wouldn't like it. Thank you.
No, but it's a very valid point.
Yeah, it is.
Whether we like it or not, it's a valid point.
Fact.
So did you want to add something?
Well, I just wanted to say that this is true, but the one thing we really do need to keep in mind is that we're looking at a baby learning to walk. A baby that learns to walk is going to fall several times before it actually gets to its ultimate system. That's what's happening right now. Blockchain is the first iteration of what is coming out to be a system that then starts to, one, the word you don't like, decentralize, and build a relationship that we don't, it's a relationship that doesn't need to be trust between us as individuals. We get to trust a system that does a certain thing, and we know that it will do that regardless of what's going on. But the process of it, nothing is going to be 100% perfect. This is absolutely the truth. You know, no matter where you put your money, no matter what kind of money you got, they rob banks, they rob people. You could be held up and you have to give up your wallet and somebody says, give me your passcode. You don't want to give it up, but if it's holding a gun to your head, you're giving it up and you're going to lose your money in the same way anybody else can steal it, from you in that way. But you definitely do get the sense that he can't just grab that and run away with it and then go ahead and put my information in, because he won't have it. He's not going to be able to steal from it. And I don't need any other source to make that clear.
So what I'm hearing you say is, in answer to the statement and the assertion that you can't trust the blockchain, that we're taking baby steps and there's going to be plenty of places in which things are going to fall down on our way to a better system. Is that fairly sum up what you said?
Everybody remember dial-up modems?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. You know, better is a real term, and actually, you know what I'm doing. I know what you're doing, and we're not building it on top of Bitcoin, type of chain. Okay. So I absolutely agree with that. And I'm going to come back again because you keep on sort of slipping back. Is those chains, the Bitcoin and Ethereum. In fact, Ethereum is working very hard, to come up with a way with it, a little different way than what they're doing today to make it a little bit more trustworthy. But they're essentially trustless. But the world is growing, and it's really exciting. That's why I'm here. I don't mean to downplay it. All I'm saying is that the exciting stuff is yet to happen. Don't worry about the fact that somebody lost $250 million. The change that you're going to be dealing with, you'll be protected.
I'm going to touch on why I have an issue with the decentralization word and why I have an issue with the trustless word. Okay? Because in order for people to understand it, I observe that things that we define by what we're not are usually the things we struggle with most. Okay? We have to come up with a way to replace that. What is the purpose of something being trustless? Why would I want to be part of something that has no trust? That's what trustless sounds like to me. Why would I want to be part of something that's chaotic, that has no... What we're really talking about when we're talking about decentralization, once I could get inside and understand what the purpose of that was something that was open and transparent. It's not a matter of decentralization. That's a technical way in which we bring about the transparency, but it's the transparency that we're at. As an investor, I have come to believe that all wealth is created by agreement. Nothing else. It doesn't matter how hard you work. It doesn't matter who you know. It doesn't matter what your background is. Unless you can create agreement, there's no change in wealth. And this is a new model of agreement, right? Whatever you're working on and coming up with a system that overcomes what you see as the limitations of Bitcoin to be something that you have more personal trust in. Unless everybody agrees with you, like the guy at the back who was saying, can I start up my own blockchain? It's not going to go anywhere, right? And this is a different model of agreement that gives more people power than a centralized system. Can we agree on that? Yeah? Yes, sir.
So I have another question. So, are all of the hashes based on fingerprints? So do you need a fingerprint in order to have an hash? No.
He was, I think the question for everybody else is, do you have to have a fingerprint in a, it was an analogy that he was simply making that it's as effective as a fingerprint. So that was
Right,
really
because,
the purpose.
fingerprints are unique to everyone. That's why they're used in criminal law to prove, they can use it in a court of law. So a hash is a digital fingerprint for the block that the data has been written to.
So is mining. Mining is an analogy too, by the way, right?
Right,
You're not
because you're
really
not actually mining, you're solving an algorithm.
We're now involved in a mining operation together, and we're beginning to talk about a refinery. There's no such thing as a refinery, but we are analogizing a refinery in order to make the value of what we mine more effective.
Yeah, that's probably a better analogy. It started mining and it started out of Bitcoin because that's how Bitcoins are created, by mining. Yeah.
Right.
There's nobody out there that's issued, like the U.S. government issuing dollars. There's nobody issuing Bitcoins. It's when you mine a Bitcoin, you get
agreement.
You get created
with agreement, right?
Through agreement,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. It creates Bitcoin. That's why they end up being called miners.
Right.
Concept.
The gentleman in front row had a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious. I'm sitting here and I'm listening, and for some reason the word distributed centralization came to mind because only certain people will be able to mine because of the sophistication of the algorithms. So what does that do?
Can you clarify that?
You're saying the mining in terms of for someone to be able to put something on a block, right, within 10 minutes of time, you're going to need a certain amount of computing power, a certain amount of mathematical skill set.
Access to low energy costs.
The whole line, right? So that's going to separate, that's going to become a separation in and of itself. So those who do that become the new centralization.
That's a very interesting statement, Mr. Miner. What do you think about that? Do you want me to repeat that?
To a point, yes. I mean, it's just like how Visa and MasterCard are, there's the processing behind it. However, it's not really, it may seem that it's centralized, but the blockchain is written to every node that's on the chain. So even those miners that are mining for profit, it takes an incredible amount of financing to even get to that level in the first place. So that is the reward for that. I mean, when I started mining, say 5 years ago, and I was in Honduras at the time, and I was actually teaching kids to use Raspberry Pis with little off-the-shelf rock miners you can buy from Amazon. And I was teaching these little 9-year-olds how to set up little mines. And in a place like Honduras where the electricity was cheap, you could mine like $36 a month. And so you could actually mine enough Bitcoin, 4 years ago to pay for the electricity that it cost you to mine in the first place. However, let's look at mining for just a second because
as you go to pull up that, I'm going to ask you to incorporate something I hear in his comment, which is, given the evolution of mining as you're talking about, what I hear him saying, isn't this sort of creating a stratification, another class, right? Of some people having the elite access to that and others not. Does that sort of go, is that part of your issue? So,
But they don't have control over it.
One of the things we can project to respond to that as well, my research is showing that one of the problems around mining is the uses of energy, how much energy you need. So they're working on technology to resolve that, which would make it, hopefully, won't have this hierarchy of those who can afford or those who have the energy for the power.
So I'm gonna let Dustin answer his question, and I want to speak directly to yours, myself.
I was just.
Okay.
No, I know, but I think it adds some context for all the entrepreneurs in the room and even the tech savvy people in the room. So go ahead.
Absolutely. So just to address the previous question really quickly, I'm mining right now on my server, but I'm not mining for money. I'm mining transactions in order that the blockchain works. So does all mining have to be rewarded, or are there going to be a type? Is there going to be miners that mine for the sake of the chain itself? You know, and this becomes, you know, is blockchain going to become the new religion? Because, you know, and it's sort of taken on that sort of role, because some people will only mine for money, and then others will mine for the sake of the chain itself.
That's
And just to touch on what she was saying, what the lady was saying just now, in terms of energy, mining and miners may actually lead in discovering new ways or even cheaper green energy, because of the need that it has, especially those miners that are conscious of carbon footprint and so on. Daniel?
You took the wind right out of my sails, buddy. No, what I was going to say, to amplify that, I'm an impact investor, so I only invest in projects of what I believe in, my team believes to be of social impact. So the fact that he was running a mining operation was definitely of interest to us from a technological standpoint, but their use of energy was actually what attracted us, not the mining part. Because they're using a lot less energy than a typical mining operation does. And so that adds to what he just said theoretically that's actually happening in practice, because we're not the only ones that are doing that, right? So everyone all over the world that is looking to adopt or embed the blockchain technology has to struggle with that same issue. And human beings just have a way of innovating their way out of these kind of problems, right? Yes, sir.
Well, just like with actual currency, centralization probably won't come from the people who create it, right?
Yeah.
It'll come from the people who make the rules about how it's used and the cost of using it. For example, like you have in the real world, you have miners that go to a mine, they pull the gold out of the ground. You have people that spend the money, but they don't really control it. It's the people who make the rules on how it's going to be used, the rates that you pay for its usage. That's where the centralization is going to come from, I think.
That's a very fair point. I mean, that's an aspect of human behavior that's just going to resolve itself over time, as opposed to a central bank being nominated 150 years ago and they're still doing that, whether they may not be relevant to today, right? We could have a nice conversation about that, but yes.
And when you're saying mining, what do you mean? So I mean, in proof of work systems need mining, but then in the States, my understanding, they can be processed in other ways. So when you're saying mining, is that more broadly, or is that specifically toward like proof of work concepts?
Do you want to address that? I could, but I'm sure you can do a better job.
Sure, so when you keep talking about mining, right, but mining is a huge issue with blockchain, it's not scalable. So that's...
Why would you say it's not scalable?
Well, because of the number of transactions that it can process at any given point. So like Bitcoin, it can only process like what, I don't know how many, but you know, maybe several handfuls of transactions a second versus thousands on Visa. And that's why like proof of work concepts are kind of, you know, one view versus like proof of stake.
Yeah.
So I just keep talking about mining, so I'm not sure like a proof of stake concepts, I feel like you can, you know, through asset tokenization, have the blockchain run kind of separately and through a whole other way where it's much more scalable, because it's not this thing of like really mining, using energy, it's really something that can just be done, you know, instantaneously.
So does that not tie into the baby steps we're talking about? Because when the whole thing started, there was only proof of work, and then we had proof of stake that emerged later on. And then, like when he was talking about languages and languages deriving from the original language.
Totally, like how we're talking about mining right now, because it seems like it's...
So you're saying like our definition for what we're talking about here is not clear enough?
Yes.
Okay.
Plus, isn't proof of stake kind of more centralized, right? Like, aren't you saying that the stakeholders deserve more trust than the other people in the system? Whereas proof of work allows anyone with a miner to connect and start helping with all the transactions. So that's just my complaint about that.
Dustin, what I'm hearing in the room is that we don't have a clear enough definition on what we're really referring to when we're talking about mining, because you're referring to it within your private blockchain. Most people think of it in terms of mining coins, Then we have different methodologies of doing that. And yet we have to think about the actual, behavioral applications of everything that we do here. So how do we really define what mining is?
The only way to really come to that would be through a consensus, pun intended, because we're moving in that direction. Even, we have the Lightning Network for Bitcoin and processing of those transactions. It's becoming faster and lighter, and there's actually less energy being used, although there's a lot of talk about, mining is using up so much energy. But if you compare, the amount of energy that the blockchain uses compared to, say, Visa or MasterCard, because...
Or mining gold.
You're involving banks, and then you're involving transportation for the people to get to the banks, and so there's this whole plethora of things that people aren't taking into consideration when they try to compare the amount of energy uses from an older system to this new emerging system.
Let me ask you, you've raised the question, you clearly have some knowledge of some of the distinctions within it. How do you define mining if you had to explain it to somebody who'd never heard of it?
I mean, I'm still learning myself.
Sure.
And I'm struggling because, I just took an MIT course, I just finished it, and they kind of put the whole Bitcoin aspect and the proof of work concept to the side almost in the class and focus more on the proof of stake concept. So I'm just intrigued now, it seems like it's very work focused and...
Of this demonstration.
Of this demonstration, yeah. So I'm just wondering, is that really, do you view that as maybe the trend still? Or in my view, or from what I've learned so far, really the scalability issue is kind of like a showstopper in a lot of industries.
I'm going to come back to our baby step conversation. Because I really do think, I think we can all feel in our gut when we talk about 1997 internet, that's kind of where we're at right now, right? We've gone from a huge excitement to a massive crash. I think we might have a little bit more of a crash coming before we bounce up from my own analysis. And then we have all of the infrastructure plays that are coming in. I have no idea what it is you're working on, but there's thousands of people who have the same sense that there's something more that can be done with this technology. We've got some inherent flaws that need to be solved. And so I'm sure we're going to have a lot of derivatives of things that we call it. Even the word mining to begin with is already an analogy. It's like, calling your phone a phone. Is it really a phone? Is it really a computer?
I was curious.
We have to merge all these things together. But I do think that the distinction for me that was biggest as a non-technical person looking at this is to understand that what we call mining, which I always thought of as just producing the money supply of cryptocurrency, is far from that. I mean, it's really kind of a result that we attach a value to. It's that structural, functional piece of making transactions happen, which is essentially what the mining, what we call mining aspect to be, right? And that has far more implications than just producing something that we can sell, right? Which, as he's showing in this case.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like you made a reference to your phone. The actual phone function of this computer that's in your hand is probably the least most work intensive thing that this device can do, but we still call it a phone. Right? So same in mining. That's the evolution of it, because it's not just mining for reward, but it's a mining for the transactions to keep the chain alive.
And speaking
don't keep the chain alive, then you have no chain.
And speaking on the behavioral finance, anthropological side of it, it's the agreement part of it that's at essence, right?
Right, which goes well.
The only reason that piece of paper in your pocket that you call $1 is because everybody agrees it's $1. If you didn't, it wouldn't be $1, it'd just be a piece of paper. It's not really a very effective form of agreement. It's got a lot of faith connected to it. Back to the trustless conversation. Yes.
Good question. On Ethereum, who controls the price of gas? Does the price of gas change? And who controls
Do you have
the
an
price?
answer to that?
It changes based off of the activity on the system, so, as well as how quickly you want that transaction done. So if you want to save money on gas, you can have it as a much slower transaction, and your gas price will be lowered. But if you want priority on the mining system, then you can pay them more to get your transaction done faster.
But is there like a base unit that you start off with?
Wise.
Did you want to weigh in on that, Dustin?
Yeah, you can also set it in your smart contracts as well. You can set the gas prices, but he was absolutely correct in his response.
So we've probably gone a little over time, right? Yes?
Yep.
Oh, you got one more? Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah. So I see that there's two ways for an example that you used with the song, where the song file can sit on the chain, or it can sit off chain, and the blockchain just monitors access to it, right? In the example you just showed us, was the song file on chain or off chain?
In the example that I just showed you, that's actually on the chain. But it was leaving, the contract was deployed to the chain, and then we interacted with it in order to write the data that's going to be stored in the contract. It's going to be on the chain forever and ever. However, what that leads to is payment for your intellectual property. At some point, these contracts are going to sit on the chain until that song is sold, and then once that song is sold through whatever service, that service is going to talk to the blockchain, and the blockchain is going to say, oh, I have an identifier for this particular song. It's tied to this smart contract. It's going to bring that smart contract up and say, oh, well, if this is Kayla, it's started off at, and so on, and then be able to disperse immediately. So it'll be hard to, I think I have,
But song files are, I guess, relatively small, but if it was a bigger file, like a movie file, I don't understand how you could have a scalable system where massive files are sitting on chain. I'm sorry, I'm not technically.
Well, that's
oh, I see what it means.
Let me
So,
add in.
yeah, the music won't be on the chain, just the data that represents it. So we could store the music, say, in a Dropbox or a server storage, but the smart contract is what interacts with the storage and allows the release of that data, but not only the release of that data for the consumer to download, but also for the creator to get payment.
No, that's not what I thought, but is it ideal in the future if the file itself, in this case, is part of the blockchain, just so you can get rid of a third party altogether?
Well, I will speak to this from an IT standpoint. So if I have a server that's handling all of my Active Directory, and I have all my files that it's accessing, it's actually more efficient if it's stored in storage servers that are optimized for that, and then they interact with each other rather than having them all in that one place.
But isn't that storage server like Spotify?
No, it could be your storage server, and the blockchain will trigger functions in your database. So it can sit there,
Right.
it can trigger it.
But in keeping with the whole decentralized nature of the blockchain, the files would be stored in a peer-to-peer network. So you wouldn't have a centralized server that's storing all the music files. The music files would be stored in an encrypted fashion on different nodes. So you're right, it would be sort of like a blockchain thing, but it'd kind of be like, remember the old Napster? When you would download a song from Napster, it came because, you know, your friend Paulie had the song on there, and then Pete had the song, and then some guy in Canada had the song, and when you went to go and download it, it came from all three of those computers. Well, that's eventually how this, a lot of this data will be stored in a decentralized nature, but just encrypted with, like say, 256 bit encryption, which is practically impossible to crack unless the smart contract releases the cipher that decrypts that so that the person, so you could have this song or this movie title or this book that's stored in all of these different servers around the world, but it's unreadable until the smart contract would decipher the crypto lock that's on there and in order for the person to open it up.
What I want to offer here, just in terms of conclusion and kicking us off into tomorrow, we're talking about mining of actual cryptocurrency on a daily basis, so we're always talking about money and opportunity and everything else. And one of the phrases that we refer to, going back to the gold rush of the 1890s, you know who made all the money in the gold rush? The guys who made the picks and the shovels, right? You've heard this, right? Now, you might think of the technology people and the mining and all of that as the picks and the shovels, and that would be a fair analogy. But I think the real analogy are these kinds of conversations. Because this is what explains this stuff, figuring it all out, going back and forth, saying, well, what is mining? Well, what is trust? What is agreement, right? Because this is stuff that we're going to own together. And so you being able to ask these questions in the first place and be able to engage people in conversations about it, so they don't think that it's just some, money sitting in a game somewhere, but this is really something that belongs to all of us, and we don't have to depend on a central government in order to tell us whether it's about money or some other kind of application. Money is just one kind of application of blockchain. It's the explaining that is going to be the picks and the shovels of this gold rush. That's really what we're doing here, right? Thank you for putting it together.
All right. Thank you so much.